Pennsylvania Germans during the American Revolution. The Pennsylvania Germans, the first major group of non-English speakers which settled in Pennsylvania, played a key role in the American Revolution, the movement and conflict which led to the independence of the United States and the end of British rule within its boundaries between 1765 and 1783. The Pennsylvania Germans that support the revolution did so for religious, social, political, and other reasons. Men signed up to fight, ministers preached during services, proclaiming God to be on their side, and newspapers spread the news of resistance and independence. Despite these reasons, support for the revolution among the Pennsylvania Germans was not universal. Some chose to remain loyal to the crown, either for continuing their allegiance to the mother country or for fear of reprisals, while others chose to be pacifists and stay out of the conflict without choosing a side for the sake of peace. With all of these positions in mind, one can ponder what were the opinions of the Pennsylvania Germans of independence, their experiences during the war, and what did they contribute, or lack thereof, to the cause of the American Revolution. This is not a well-known chapter in America's founding, and it's a story that deserves to be told. Germans have lived in Pennsylvania since 1683, when German settlers were given permission by William Penn to set up a settlement north of Philadelphia, which became known as Germantown. These early settlers comprised a variety of religious denominations, and some came to the British American colonies for economic and religious liberty. Many of these early settlers settled in the southeast portion of the colony, primarily in Northampton, Berks, Lancaster, and York counties. Approximately 90% of the inhabitants in these counties were of German stock. They largely kept to themselves and took steps to hold on to their language and their culture. At the eve of the American Revolution and the struggle for independence, approximately 1 in 3 Pennsylvanians were of German stock, as well as approximately 10 to 12% of the population of the American colonies. In the city of Philadelphia, which had a population of around 40,000 people in 1776, Germans made up a sizable amount of its residents. In fact, Pennsylvania Germans formed the first area within the city where a foreign language was spoken, and many street signs and inscriptions were in both English and German, and in some areas solely German. Initially, support for the revolutionary fervor among the Germans was limited. This was mostly due to location and the fact that they spoke a different language than most colonists, and there was a hesitation to protest against the policies of the British Crown. Nonetheless, there were those who spoke out against the excessive taxes that were imposed on the colonies by the Crown and Parliament, and expressed these opinions through a variety of means, either through newspapers and broadsides, speeches, or simply word of mouth. The coercive acts, or intolerable acts, passed by Parliament in 1774 were key in arousing resentment against British colonial policy among the Pennsylvania Germans, particularly outside of Philadelphia. Their faith was of major importance on whether they were willing to support the cause of the revolution or not. They were ministers within all the German-based denominations which either preached pro- or anti-British sentiments during their sermons. Most notably were Lutheran minister Heinrich Melchior Muhlenberg, who was dedicated to preserving ties of the mother country and declared that his congregation should, quote, fear God, honor the king, and Dunker Bishop Christoph Sauer II, who declared that the rights of the colonists must be preserved. The press also had a major influence on their positions. Before the American Revolution, the Pennsylvania Germans had a thriving newspaper business, beginning with the opening of the Pennsylfanisch Zeitung by Benjamin Franklin in 1732. Over the coming decades, more German-language newspapers were established throughout the colony and were key in spreading information and messages to form political opinions within the German community during the period of controversy towards repeated British taxation in the lead-up to the Revolutionary War. As with all other newspapers in the American colonies, stories and speeches were circulated within the community and from colony to colony. Most Pennsylvania Germans, particularly in Philadelphia, rushed to enlist upon the beginning of hostilities with Great Britain after the battles of Lexington and Concord in April 1775. Militia units were formed throughout their churches, from which many of the officers were also members of the congregations. Among the more notable officers were Wilhelm Will, who served as a colonel and formed a local unit of Pennsylvania militia, and Wilhelm Ritter, who was a first lieutenant in the 1st Regiment of Artillery. Many ministers also left their congregations to serve as chaplains within the units that were formed out of ministers from that particular congregation. Entire regiments of Pennsylvania Germans were also formed early in the war, but over time these units would be disbanded and its men joined other units as the war progressed. The Pennsylvania Germans hold the credit for being the first to publish the Declaration of Independence in a newspaper. This remarkable feat was accomplished by Heinrich Müller on July 9, 1776, in his Der Vollenlicht Pennsylfanisch Staatsbund. Due to this action, German speakers in Pennsylvania were able to learn about American independence before their English-speaking counterparts. German pacifists found themselves in a hard place during the war. This included members of the Amish, Mennonite, and Brethren denominations. Due to their positions on violence and conflict, they were often alienated by both British and American forces and authorities. As a result, both sides, particularly the Americans, applied pressure to these groups. These groups declared their allegiance to the crown in a signed document in 1727, and when the war broke out in 1775, they declared their neutrality. In 1777, state residents were required to take an oath of loyalty to the state and its constitution and pay taxes which would go towards the war effort. As this was a violation of their religious beliefs, many resisted these measures and caught the eye of the authorities, who considered this as support for the British. As a result, many pacifists, particularly the Mennonites, were arrested for not taking the oath. While there was some resistance among some groups within the Pennsylvania German community, the majority of its members support the cause of American liberty and independence. This was particularly true among the members of the German Reformed community of Philadelphia. Even before independence was declared, support for resistance to British authority was widespread. Much of this fervor resonated from Reverend Caspar Weiberg of the Zion German Reformed Church. He preached against British taxation and the necessity of American independence. Churches served as places for council meetings and recruiting stations for local militias. Some people had a change of sentiment once the conflict began. They believed that the presence of British soldiers and the actions that some of them took towards American civilians caused them to change their outlook. Among them was Minister Muhlenberg, who believed that his religious liberty could no longer be protected under the crown and began to view the British in a negative light. He wrote a journal of his daily life, which included sermons, family matters, and what was transpiring with the war. During the British occupation of Philadelphia, beginning in 1777 and concluding in 1778, there was resentment among the population, not necessarily from the presence of the soldiers, but the actions they were taking during the occupation. British troops desecrated churches by gutting the interiors and turning them into hospitals or barracks. This was possibly done as a retaliatory measure for most Pennsylvania Germans siding with the revolution. Ministers that have spoken out in favor of the revolutionary cause were imprisoned, which include Caspar Weiberg. Many chose to flee the city as a result, oftentimes in panic. Minister Muhlenberg wrote in his journal about the disdain he had for the British over the targeted confiscation of Protestant churches and how it did not justify their presence in the city. Quote, "Such confiscations of church property were hardly to be found among Turks and Persians, much less is it customary in Christian kingdoms and states, except the degenerate Britons who of late have spared the popish chapels and Quaker meetings in Philadelphia and profaned our churches." Unquote. This viewpoint was very popular with others, and it simply proved for some that liberty, especially religious liberty, did not matter to the British occupiers, and it only further garnered support for the revolutionary cause, though it showed that not all religious viewpoints were treated as equal. As with most Americans, the Pennsylvania Germans welcomed the end of the Revolutionary War in 1781 and with celebration and hopes for the future. They were delighted that peace was restored, and they were interested in what the new American nation would become. Many prominent leaders of the community entered politics, including the son of Minister Muhlenberg, Peter, who was elected to the United States House of Representatives in 1788, and later the Senate in 1800. Another son, Frederick, quote, became Speaker of the Pennsylvania Assembly in 1783 and was elected president of the Pennsylvania Convention that ratified the federal Constitution in 1787, unquote. He later became the first Speaker of the House in the United States Congress. While the Pennsylvania Germans contributed a significant amount to the American cause during the Revolution and subsequent war, they still in many ways maintained their own separate identity. German was still the language that the majority of them spoke, and their still relative isolation hindered rapid assimilation. The only major exception to this isolation was the German community in Philadelphia. During the 1790s, the German Reformed Church in the United States officially separated itself from the European branch and became its own separate denomination, though it still maintained some European influences. A German Reformed Church in Philadelphia hosted celebrations of the new American Republic, including a ceremony congratulating George Washington on becoming the first president of the United States in 1789, a ceremony in 1801 hosted by the Democratic Republican Party, commemorating the inauguration of Thomas Jefferson as the third U.S. president, and a procession shortly after from Independence Hall to the church in which the Declaration of Independence was recited, and attendees wore caps of liberty. The Pennsylvania Germans contributed so much to the cause of the American Revolution, and this key fact should not be downplayed. Many of its soldiers, speakers, future leaders, both civil and clerical, came from this key community. After the war, they contributed their faithfulness to the new nation and participated in celebrations commemorating the Republic and its leaders and took part in national politics. Quote, it has been suggested that without the devoted efforts of the Pennsylvania Germans, the war against England could not have been brought to a successful conclusion, unquote. If this is the case, their contribution to the cause was invaluable, and the story of the Pennsylvania Germans is an essential aspect to the story of revolutionary America.